Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Hi, guys. Ben Dubose here, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire, contributor to Sports Talk 790, official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. It's Monday morning, March 10th. Rockets back in action tonight at home against the Orlando Magic, game 2 of a 6-game homestand at Toyota Center. But there is some breaking news that we need to discuss prior to tip-off, and so that's what we're going to do today in a special minicast episode of The Lager Line, courtesy of Carbach Brewing, their beer developed in collaboration with your Houston Rockets. So as we learned Sunday night, Amen Thompson out 10 to 14 days, first reported by ESPN's Shams Charania, with the left ankle sprain that he suffered in the closing minutes of Saturday's blowout win over the New Orleans Pelicans. Rockets 39-25, fifth in the West, just a game back of the Memphis Grizzlies for the number 4 slot, Southwest Division lead, and home court advantage in the first round of the playoffs. Unfortunately, every game still meaningful because while the Rockets are closing the gap on teams like the Grizzlies, like the Nuggets, like even the Lakers, who lost Saturday night and may not have LeBron James for the next couple of weeks, well, the teams right beneath you in the standings, most notably the Lakers and Timberwolves, simply are not losing. And so the Rockets are without probably their best player in Amen Thompson for the next week or two, all while the Warriors and Timberwolves are making a push. Warriors at 28 losses, Timberwolves at 29. Warriors have the tiebreaker over you. Timberwolves, it's dicey. Winning the division would really help on that front. And so hopefully the Rockets can run down Memphis. And if that's the case, even if they do get caught by one or both of those teams, the Warriors and Timberwolves, it wouldn't really matter. The end goal for the Rockets is simply to stay in the top 6 of the West standings, with number 5 right now, 39-25. You get in the top 6, you directly qualify for the playoffs. If you fall to 7th or below, you have to go through the play-in tournament. So I think for this Rockets team, and especially within the construct of the Western Conference in 2025, getting just any spot in the top 6, regardless of if it's 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, it's all the same. Because I think there's matchups where you can be as high as 2, and you might be an underdog in the first round against Anthony Edwards and the Timberwolves, who advanced to the Western Conference Finals a year ago. And you could conversely be 6 and perhaps be a favorite if you draw the Memphis Grizzlies at 3, a team that you beat 3 or 4 times, and the only loss was at the buzzer on the road in a game where you didn't have your all-star, Alperen Sengun. So other than the Thunder at 1, and knock on wood, the Rockets shouldn't be in play for the 8 seed. And if they are, something went horribly wrong because you're having to go through the aforementioned play-in tournament. As long as you're in the top 6, I think it's much more about matchups than seed. In a perfect world, you would like to have home court advantage. Rockets are 21-10 at Toyota Center this season. They've won 4 or 5 since the All-Star break there. But by and large, if you get to the playoffs as a top 6 seed and relatively healthy, I think everyone inside the building at Toyota Center would take that and run. They would be happy with that scenario and let the chips fall as they may once you get to April and once the playoffs start. Anyway, the reason we're having this breaking news episode is because, unfortunately, the discussion this week is not just about what happens on the court at Toyota Center. The Rockets do need to win these games for purposes of the standings, as I was just laying out where the Rockets are on this Monday, March 10th. But also, they're going to have to do it without probably their best player, Amen Thompson. Their best player, I would argue, based on his numbers as a starter, which Ime Udoka recently announced he would be for the remainder of this season in all likelihood, and really the remainder of his career, I would guess. I mean, at 22 years old is clearly on a star-like trajectory, in my opinion, and no disrespect to Alperen Sengun or Jalen Green, but when you look at the totality of Amen Thompson's production, not just offensively, but defensively, how elite he is on that end, how versatile he is, he's the best player on this team. And so to see him go down really in what should have been a celebratory 6 or so minutes. The Rockets were wrapping up a blowout victory over the Pelicans, back-to-back wins after a tough 3-game losing streak. And so it felt like the ship was getting steadied. The Rockets were up 30 in the fourth quarter. They were getting ready to clear the bench. It should have been one of the feel-good wins of the year. Rockets put up 146 points, which is the most they've put up in a single game all year. And all of a sudden, it felt like the air was let out of the balloon at Toyota Center as soon as Amen went down, because he stayed down for quite a while. I'd say about 30, 45 seconds near the basket. And then he did walk unassisted. That was some encouraging news. It was not like when Alperen Sengun got wheelchaired off when he sprained his ankle, ultimately a grade 3 sprain in Sacramento last year. But there was definitely a limp. And then about an hour after the game, we heard from Kelly Iko of The Athletic that he was, Amen that is, on a walking boot and using crutches. So yeah, as good as the Rockets played, and with Fred VanVleet on the verge of being back, he's listed as questionable tonight against the Magic. If he doesn't play tonight, I think he will against Phoenix. So it's either this game or the next. There's so many positive things with this team. It feels like they're turning it around. And then to lose probably your best overall player, it's brutal. And so I want to do a special mini cast episode here to talk about the implications. We'll have a full show with Paolo Alves later in the week. I'm sure we'll touch on the implications of the Amen injury, but also to tie it in with what's going on the floor in each game. Hopefully the Rockets can continue to put together some wins. They are playing losing teams over the remainder of this homestand, but we'll see. And we'll pick that up with Paolo later in the week. Now it's just about the Amen Thompson injury and some of the immediate implications, both in terms of the starting lineup as well as the games ahead and the pressure that's still on the Rockets even after losing Amen. These are not games where the Rockets can say, oh, we didn't have our best player, we'll make it up later once Amen comes back. No, these are games that even without Amen, they are going to be favored. They need to win, but their margin of error is reduced. And so you can look at it as glass half full, you can look at it as glass half empty, but we'll get into that as the show progresses. I want to start by addressing a common argument that I've seen on social media, which is that this was mismanaged by the Rockets because Amen was in there with 6 minutes to go in a 30-point game, and his replacement was at the scorer's table. And at the time, he had 15 points, 11 assists, 9 rebounds. There's been some speculation that perhaps the Rockets or Amen was chasing a triple-double, although Brian Bearfield, Big Start Sports, contributes to Rockets Wire, where I'm the editor, reported that Amen didn't even know the stat line at the time. And I have a tough time thinking that the Rockets coaching staff would have him out there for that purpose if Amen himself was not aware of where he was. I think it's more the Rockets are trying to build the right habits in all of their young guys. Amen is extremely important. He has been very durable this year. And then just a freak accident. He landed on a defender's foot coming down from a shot, and his ankle rolled 90 degrees. And so for me, that's why I haven't really dived into the whole mismanagement angle in terms of, oh, were the Rockets just irresponsible having him out there? Look, I'm not going to tell you how to feel. Fan however you like. But for me, I'm not going down that road because this was not a situation where it was an overuse injury. This is not a guy who's been playing high minutes, which Amen has. He's averaged as a starter. You know, his overall numbers are like 17 points, 10 boards, 5 assists, 2 blocks, 2 steals a game, something in that neighborhood on strong efficiency. And he's done it playing 37 minutes a night. And so if a hamstring or a calf went out on just a routine movement, yeah, I could see the argument of why don't you cut off his minutes in a game where, let's be honest, the Rockets were in control for the entire fourth quarter. Why is he out there? I could be persuaded by that argument much more if it was an injury that's more in line with overuse. But landing on a defender's foot, and by the way, it probably should have been a flagrant foul. That's the Kawhi Leonard play the NBA has tried to outlaw in recent years. But I think everyone, players and especially the officials, were just sort of checked out at that point, and that's what makes it so tragic that in the game that was already over, Rockets were in victory formation mode, and for it to happen in the closing stages, just so frustrating. And so if you want to use Ime Udoka or the coaching staff or Amen, if you think that he argued to stay in the game for the triple-double, although again, Brian Bearfield has reported that that's not the case, I guess you can. But for me, I see it as something that could just as easily have happened at practice. Anytime you play 5-on-5 or even 1-on-1 basketball, there's an opportunity for you to land on someone's foot and have your ankle bend 90 degrees. It happens. It's an occupational hazard. And so for me, it's analogous to an act of God in which, someone gets in a car crash driving to the office. In theory, someone could argue if they were able to work from home, they wouldn't have been in that crash. But it's just a risk that most people take. And I think that's the healthy way to look at what happened to Amen on Saturday night. It sucks for the Rockets that they're losing probably their best player just over a month until the playoffs. But in terms of how it happened, this isn't about overuse. It's not about the minutes. It's just simply a freak accident that can happen not just in a game, but at practice, in an informal gym setting. It's part of basketball. It just is what it is. And so I'm not that enraged about how it went down. I'm frustrated because of how good he is, but I don't have anything extra when it comes to, how this all came to be. And then, truth be told, the Rockets caught a little bit of a break here in that when the reports came out late Saturday, a walking boot and crutches, immediately any hope of him playing in the next game or two was off the table. This was not a nothing burger where it's just a slight roll. No, as soon as that report came out, it was a legit sprain. And so at that point, you're just waiting to find out grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. I never thought it would be grade 3, which can be, even as much as 2 or 3 months, because unlike Sengun in Sacramento last year, he was able to walk off and he did it without assistance. This was not a wheelchair situation. Typically, if it's a grade 3, which is a total tear, it's tough to even walk. The fact that Amen could do that, to me, it was telling him it's not a grade 3. But it could have been a grade 2, which is 4 to 6 weeks. And not only would it cost you the rest of this regular season, but there'd be some question as to A, if he could be back by the playoffs, and B, if he is, would he be truly himself? Because with any ankle injury, and we've seen this with Fred VanVleet, and we will see it when he hopefully comes back this week, they aren't themselves the moment they get back. It takes some time with the lower body injury to build up your conditioning, because part of the rehab process is that you can't do the things you normally do because you need to not put as much weight on the injured body part. That's part of allowing it to heal. And so if it had been a grade 2, which until the MRI was something that I think internally and certainly the fan base feared, it would be an open question as to whether he could come back and how effective he would be. With it being presumably a grade 1, which is what 10 to 14 days is compatible with, typically a week or two, even if he's not quite himself when he comes back, hopefully by the end of March, he does have some runway 2 or 3 weeks before the playoffs start in mid-April to hopefully get back to peak form. And so, yes, the Rockets still do need to clinch their playoff spot, but on paper, assuming there are no setbacks, this is one where it could have been worse. Plenty of grade 2, grade 3 ankle sprains have happened in situations just like that. And so with it being a grade 1 and with it being an injury that wasn't really overuse, I'm frustrated, but I'm not enraged. This is a nuisance, but especially at this point in the schedule, I think it's one that the Rockets can survive. And hopefully at the end of this season, it's a footnote rather than something that actually defines their season. And so with that in mind, I want to address the schedule over the 2 weeks that Amen is likely to be out, because there's a glass half full and a glass half empty way to look at this. So the glass half full perspective, the next 7 games are all against losing opponents. The Magic, the Suns, the Mavericks, the Bulls, the Sixers, the Magic again, and the Heat. You've got an extended run against below 500 teams. 5 of those games are at home as part of that aforementioned homestand. I think the Rockets are probably going to be favored in all of those games. Maybe the one exception is Phoenix, because even though they're below 500, they do have Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, and they are playing harder. They're making a bit of a run for the play-in tournament, it seems. But I guess the Rockets are still favored in that one unless they lose badly against Orlando tonight, especially if Fred VanVleet is back in the lineup. This is the part of the schedule, and we've talked about it before, that the Rockets really need to make some hay. They need to get some separation from teams like the Warriors and the Timberwolves before the schedule gets much more difficult towards the end of this month and going into April when they have a difficult close with a lot of road games against competitive playoff bound or playoff contending teams down the home stretch of this season. And so this isn't a point of the schedule where you can shrug and say, well, we'll make it up later as long as Amen comes back, because when Amen comes back, the schedule is going to be much more difficult. These are games that you need to win. And so the glass half full way to view this situation is to say, yeah, we can win these games. We're still going to be favored. The glass half empty way is to point out that, look, you lost a big part of your talent advantage over these teams. The Rockets would not be 39-25 and have this perceived advantage if they did not have Amen Thompson for the first 60 plus games of this season. So on paper, games that should have been huge advantages for the Rockets going in, they're not as big of an advantage anymore with this version of the Rockets without Amen, and possibly without Fred VanVleet, and if he does play, not quite himself in the first few games after a month-long layoff with an ankle injury of his own. Time will tell as far as which version is right. If the Rockets are able to stack wins, certainly we'll say, whew, this came at the right time because the Rockets had enough of a buffer over these teams, and guys like Tari Eason could step up and absorb more minutes, and the Rockets survived it. But if they don't, then we'll look back and say this was a stretch where the Rockets needed to get some real separation and couldn't. Not having their best player was a big part of that. And now the Rockets would need to make up for it in all likelihood going down the home stretch of the year with some tough wins on the road against good teams. Otherwise, they'd be at risk of falling to the play-in tournament. And the whole goal of this season, which is to get a longer sample and see how guys perform under the ultimate stress test of the NBA playoffs in the best of 7 series, you'd be at risk of not accomplishing that if you follow the play-in tournament and everything comes down to 1 or 2 games. So there's a lot at stake here, and the Rockets can't say, well, we can just wait until Amen comes back and then it'll be fine. No, there's still a huge incentive to go out and take care of business starting tonight against the Magic, and hopefully they're able to do that. As far as what the lineup's going to look like and how the Rockets can best overcome it, I think if Fred doesn't come back, the obvious answer is that both Tari Eason and Jabari Smith Jr. will start. I think it's clear from Ime Udoka's comments, the Rockets view themselves as having 3 primary initiators. I don't think they even look at it so much as point guard. I think it's lead guard, or more realistically, initiators, guys who organize the team and get them into their sets as the primary ball handler. And that's Fred VanVleet, Jalen Green, and Amen Thompson. Even though guys like Aaron Holiday and Reed Sheppard, although Reed Sheppard unfortunately is down for a month with his own injury, fractured a thumb against the Pelicans last week, I think they view them, at least at this point, as more off-ball. They might guard point guards on the other end of the floor, and so it's not impossible that maybe Aaron Holiday gets a start if they think they need a smaller defender with a little more side-to-side agility. But for the most part, I think it's going to be Tari and Jabari, especially if both Fred and Amen are out, that are called on, because they're, we talked all season long. The Rockets have a clear top 7, the 5 starters plus Jabari and Tari. Well, if you're down 2 starters, put in your 2 top guys off the bench, which are Tari and Jabari. And I don't think it's a situation where the Rockets will not do that because they need a quote-unquote point guard, because, again, that's just not how they functionally use guys like Aaron Holiday off the bench. They have 3 primary ball handlers and initiators, and Fred VanVleet, Jalen Green, and Amen Thompson. With Amen out and possibly Fred out, Jalen's going to be the guy who is primarily your point guard. And I had some conversations this weekend that made me feel a little bit better about the issue with his back. Jalen's been not quite himself in terms of efficiency the last few days. We saw a big pad around his back during that Saturday home game against the Pelicans. I was told that's really not a big deal. They think he'll be fine. So Jalen should be out there, and so that'll allow you, if Fred is also sidelined along with Amen, to go with a little more size, defense, rebounding. The Rockets have picked it up on the defensive end the last couple of games. And so I think the starting lineup is easy if Fred and Amen are both out. You just go with the 2 highest usage guys off your bench and hope for the best. And then, of course, you'll need guys further down your bench. Mentioned Aaron Holiday, but also Steven Adams, a double big lineup. Rockets been trying that more. If that works against teams like the Magic and the Suns, Rockets would love to see it. Cam Whitmore, perhaps he gets another opportunity. Jayshawn Tate. But I think, by and large, it's going to be about asking guys like Tari and Jabari to step into even bigger roles from a minutes perspective, and hopefully they're able to do so efficiently and go out and have dynamic two-way performances. I think that's what happens if Fred and Amen are both out. If Amen is out, but Fred is able to come back, I'm torn. I think it may be matchup to matchup. I think in a perfect world, the Rockets would start Tari over Amen because they're the closest analog. Coaches don't want to deviate too much from their formula. I mentioned in the last episode, the Rockets choosing their starting lineup, they want to get more chemistry and cohesion. And so they're called the Terror Twins for a reason. There are some similarities between Amen and Tari's games. And so I think having Tari rather than Jabari is a little closer to the formula in terms of how the other four guys play and how they'll play when Amen ultimately comes back. And so combine that with the knowledge that since the All-Star break, Tari has generally started over Amen anyway. Or Tari has usually started over Jabari, in games where Amen shifts to point guard. I think in a perfect world, that's what Ime Udoka would do. However, there may be some matchups where you need a little more size and physicality, because the one difference between Amen Thompson and Tari Eason, Tari isn't quite as physical. He's not as much of an above the rim lob threat. And so if you're facing a bigger team, then having Sengun as your only big, that could be a little problematic, because both Tari and Jalen are a little light and they're at their best when they're defending on the perimeter. So there may be some matchups where you need Jabari Smith, who is a bit more physical, a bit stronger, and is able to function something as a stretch big, but a big nonetheless. And so it could be matchup to matchup. I think in a perfect world, Tari would be the guy that you start, and I think that's largely why he has started ahead of Jabari since the All-Star break. However, if you need to play bigger, I could see Jabari getting the nod, especially because when you're starting Dylan and Tari at the forward spots and you have a 6'7" Amen Thompson at point guard, you might be a little undersized at forwards, but you are jumbo at point guard. And so it offsets. If you're starting a fairly small Fred VanVleet at point guard, you might be too small with Dillon Brooks and Tari Eason as your forwards, especially if you're playing a bigger team that's pretty physical and likes to pound you on the low block or crash the glass. In those situations, you might benefit from the added height and muscle of Jabari. And so that's why I think it's going to be matchup to matchup. Perfect world, Tari, and gun to my head, I think Tari starts more than Jabari in this world where you do have Fred back, and so there's just one spot to determine. But I think there will be some variance. And ultimately, with Amen out, who's been your highest usage player from a minutes perspective ever since he became a starter early in 2025, this is one where it honestly doesn't matter that much in terms of who starts, because you're going to need to lean on both Tari and Jabari to play 30 plus minutes per game roles no matter what. So I don't think this is one where, we've seen Jabari recently, if it's a game where he's not shooting that well, he might play just 22 minutes, something like that. That's off the table. Regardless of who starts and who comes off the bench, without Amen, there's a lot of minutes to fill. And so these guys are going to get minutes. They're going to get shot attempts. And so it's just about, usage patterns and matchups and who fits best on a given night. The Rockets are just trying to survive this stretch. And especially against lesser teams where they need to win, it's simply an all hands on deck scenario. And so I don't think you should draw any long-term conclusions. Not that the Rockets are looking to start with those guys anyway. It's pretty clear what the starting lineup will be when everyone is healthy. I think right now Ime Udoka is just going to try and MacGyver his way through each individual game and map out what makes sense for the first 6 minutes of the first and third quarters, what makes sense for the second units late in the first and early in the second quarters, and same for the third and the fourth in the second half. That's my guess as far as the lineup. It'll change some from game to game. And then finally, in terms of who needs to step up, my initial read of the situation was Tari, because I think now he'll be a 30 plus minutes per game player, whether he starts or doesn't. And he's been taking on a bigger workload of late. We'll see if he's still out on night 2 of back-to-backs, but there's only 2 of those left, and the one this week is against the Mavs and the Bulls. So hopefully whichever one you sit him out, you can still get that win anyway. The more I think about it and the more I talk to people inside the building, I think Tari is someone who does what he does. Now, you would like him to reduce turnovers. He has some head-scratching ones, especially in transition. And so can he play better? Yes. But generally, Tari is fairly consistent in terms of his impact from game to game. And even though his minutes are going up, it's not like he's suddenly going to play a different way and become a different version. You're simply going to be scaling him up, and hopefully his leg can handle that. But all indications on that front have been good in recent weeks. To me, the guys to watch are Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun, simply because they have the most variance. The good news is that since the All-Star break, Sengun has played very well. Going into tonight, he's had 20-plus points on 60% or better shooting in 4 straight games for the first time in his career. We know he had the back issue prior to the All-Star game. He's been moving much more freely. He seems to be making decisions much quicker. We saw some of the dynamic passes against the Pelicans that, it felt like he made all the time in his first 2 NBA seasons. And then the last 2, I think because he's become a bigger part of scouting reports and the Rockets have asked a lot more from him, he's been a little hesitant and he hasn't read the floor as quickly. Well, it seems like his processing is getting back to where it was earlier in his career when he was just playing and he wasn't thinking as much. He seems to be moving much more freely with the back. Jalen Green, we know what he was doing until the last week or so. He had an extended stretch of very good play, not so much over the last 3 games. I'm told, again, the Rockets aren't worried about his back. They don't view that as a major issue. We know what Jalen can be when he's right. Think back to March a year ago and how the Rockets survived the stretch after Sengun hurt his ankle. It was because Jalen was incredible. Jalen and Sengun are good but flawed players in that if it's a night where they aren't playing well, you might see Sengun get benched for Jabari or Jalen get benched for Tari because they are not great defensive players. And if they're not efficient offensively, if they're tentative for one reason or another, if they're turning the ball over, they have bad nights. But they also have really good nights. And when they are good, when they are scoring and playmaking at a high level, they are all-star level players. Sengun was an all-star this year. Jalen was in the conversation as the leading scorer for a Houston team that's been top 4, top 3 in the West most of the season. These guys have that gear. It's about whether they can tap into it more consistently. Signs are positive on Sengun. They were positive on Jalen until the last week. Hopefully he's getting healthier. He is at home. Plane flights definitely aren't good for your back. And thankfully Rockets have 6 in a row at Toyota Center right now. So hopefully that will help. I just think the biggest hit when it comes to losing a man, beyond the obvious he's a really good basketball player, he's also probably your most consistent player in that he does what he does from one game to the next. With Jalen and Sengun, there's a lot more variance. And so with Amen going out and your floor being a little bit lower, these are games where you need your ceiling raisers to go out and get it done, especially against lesser teams. This is not murderer's row, although Orlando does have a top 3 defense, so that'll be challenging to 2 guys in Jalen and Sengun that depend on scoring and playmaking at a high level to be at their best. But I just think from a minutes perspective, you'll see Tari and Jabari probably get the biggest bump. But in terms of do the Rockets actually survive this stretch and win enough games to maintain this 3-4 game buffer over the play-in range and make it where you're not sweating every game down the home stretch of the year and risking having to go through the play-in tournament to get to the playoffs, Jalen and Sengun are the guys to watch. I think that's the way the Rockets themselves are looking at it. And honestly, maybe that's the way it should be. These are your year 4 guys. These are the 2 that have been there at the lowest points. Now you're within a month of returning to the playoffs for the first time in 5 years, playing your first playoff basketball at Toyota Center in 6 years. Perhaps it's fitting, symbolic, that it's on their shoulders, that they need to go out there and get it done. No excuses because they're at home. They're playing teams that aren't great. They have been generally on an upward trajectory. There are some bumps, as there always are, but in terms of how they're playing now relative to the start of the year, I think it's better in both cases. If Jalen and Sengun go out and play the way they are capable of playing, the Rockets should be fine. That's the bottom line. When you consider the schedule and the opponents in front of you over the 10 to 14 days that Amen is likely to be out. If they don't, then yeah, it could get hairy because your floor is significantly lower without Amen. You're not going to be as dynamic defensively. You need to put the ball in the bucket. But if Sengun keeps doing what he's done over the last week, if Jalen can get back to who he was before this recent downturn, it should be okay. Those are the guys. Your floor is lower, so you're going to have to lean into your ceiling guys a bit more. And you're playing at home against a lesser part of the schedule. No excuses. Trust them to go out and do it. And if they do, then the Rockets will welcome back Amen in a couple of weeks. They'll have a lead at least comparable to what they have now in the standings over teams in the play-in tournament, and they can focus on getting Amen healthy down the stretch of the year and having him in peak form for when the games get really meaningful when the playoffs start in mid-April. Anyway, that'll do it for today. Just wanted to give some high-level takeaways as far as what to watch for coming off this brutal Amen injury, although, again, it could have been worse, certainly, but still losing your best player for at least 10 to 14 days, it's never good. I think that's the way we should be looking at this stretch, the remainder of this homestand and the remainder of the time. What we hope is the time, at least, that Amen will not be out there. Again, we'll have a longer discussion, more game analysis in our full show with Paolo later in the week. This is just me laying out a few of the high-level storylines to watch for over the remainder of this homestand, and we'll see the way things play out starting tonight at Toyota Center. Hope to see you all there. Anyway, until our next full show, which should be coming in the not too distant future, I'll break it here. If you want more content in the interim, of course, the best place to get it is on Twitter/X, where I'm on there at Ben Dubose. This show is on there at the Logger Line. If you go to the link tree in the bio of the Logger Line, you can find links to our distribution partners, Google, Apple, Spotify. Subscribe, leave positive review if you've not already. But also friends, partners, sponsors of the program, Sports Talk 790, USA Today's Rockets Wire, Carback Brewing. Please consume their content as well. If we look good to those friends, partners, and sponsors, that helps us keep running as one of the most active podcasts covering Houston Rockets basketball. We take a lot of pride in that. We're excited to provide even more content in these weeks leading up to the first Rockets playoff appearance. At least we hope the first Rockets playoff appearance in 5 years. And so if you show some love to our partners, if you subscribe, leave a positive review on your platform of choice, those are ways that we can look good and keep the business model working as one of the most active podcasts covering Houston Rockets basketball. All right, we'll adjourn for tonight. Until next time, this is Where We'll Break. Go Rockets.